Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com and the Big Four Accounting Firms YouTube channel. Before we get started, just wanted to remind everybody to support us if you have a chance or if you can. Even $1 helps, and we have a link in the description to a website called Buy Me a Coffee. It's just a way to donate to us and support us. Again, any amount is helpful so that we can keep putting out content. And there's also other ways for you to support us in the show notes to this podcast or on YouTube in the description. In today's podcast, we're going to be talking about a couple of news stories. First up, we're going to talk about Deloitte facing age discrimination lawsuits in Australia. As we all know, the Big Four accounting firms in Australia always have the most interesting news. And Deloitte is fighting subpoenas that would force it to produce all retirement discussions with partners once they reach 62 years old. And this is out of the Australian Financial Review. And there's an audit partner who refused to retire, and I guess they kicked him out, or they forced him out. And so he sued them, and now they're trying to subpoena all discussions between the partners and Deloitte and anything that Deloitte might have said to them. And Deloitte is trying to say that any retirement is voluntary, but it would be pretty insane if they had to provide this. But I think it's also kind of insane if you're a partner in a Big Four accounting firm and you refuse to retire. I'm on both sides of this thing because I think most of these partners are extremely wealthy, or at least you should be. If you're not, then that's your own fault. But also, you should be able to start your own firm. It makes it really hard for young people to grow their careers. And I don't think this would be a problem if the Big Four accounting firms made more partners, but I think they make it pretty difficult. They make you jump through all these weird administrative hoops. And meanwhile, they face all these regulatory actions and lawsuits anyway. They don't avoid doing wrong things. But here they're facing age discrimination in Australia. They have partners that love the money too much and refuse to retire. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of that, because the Big Four accounting firms want us to think that they're perfectly social justice warriors, that they're doing everything perfect as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion. But if they're discriminating against older people, that's one area where they're not encouraging diversity and equity. And also, another thing that this brings up an issue for Deloitte and other accounting firms is it's not going to help their diversity and equity and inclusion just for the race part, because the guy that's suing them, and a lot of the partners in Australia are probably going to be white, but the guy that's suing them is white. He's older, and so the partners in the Big Four accounting firms are already older white people, mainly men. And in Australia, you're going to face this age discrimination lawsuit, so they're not really going to get rid of these guys. So the demographics are going to skew that way, and then I'm sure partners in other countries are going to look at this, and they're going to do the same thing. And you can't be for diversity, equity, and inclusion and discriminate based on age, because that's a form of discrimination. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And that's why I still don't think that the Big Four accounting firms are going to meet their diversity metrics that they have around the world. And more is coming out around that diversity and equity inclusion stuff, because the U.S. is following Europe, where the government in the U.S. is forcing employers to release pay gap data. So there's more to come on that. The Big Four accounting firms are going to get squeezed on that area. They're trying to be proactive, but I don't think it's going to come down in their favor. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. The next story we're going to talk about is about Grant Thornton. There's a survey that came out, and it was in multiple news organizations, that almost 90% of Grant Thornton's employees, at least in the UK, don't want to go back to the office. They want to remain remote. And so Grant Thornton is going to look into how to implement that. And the news story also talked about PwC and how they're giving those Fridays off in the UK. But I think this goes to show a lot of things, that people are getting used to working at home but also how people in the big four accounting firms don't really want to work around their colleagues anymore or at their client sites. So I find that pretty interesting, and Grant Thornton's going to look into this and see how they can implement it in their workplace. So that's something to keep in mind if you're going to be working for the big four accounting firms. But also, if you're an associate at the big four accounting firms and you're working remotely, I think it's going to be very hard for you to learn and feel like you're learning. So I think this could be good for more senior people. But if you're younger and you're looking forward to this kind of environment, I would discourage you from that, because you need to be able to go to people and ask them questions without having to schedule a Zoom meeting or do stuff online. I think you get worried if you're interrupting somebody while they're doing their errands or goofing off at home. And I know that's not what is happening all the time, but that's what this work from home type of stuff does. But I think also people don't like working at the big four accounting firm, and that's not 100%, but there's a large amount of people that really don't like working in the big four accounting firms, as you can tell by the turnover. So Grant Thornton's is looking into this, and I'm sure the other accounting firms are seeing the same thing. And it'll just be interesting to see how the big four accounting firms go back to the office. But another thing the article talks about is Grant Thornton talking with their clients, because if you're working accountant, you're client service facing. So you have to do what your clients tell you. And if your clients want you to show up at their client site and work with them, then you're going to have to do that. And especially if you're making sales, a lot of big four accounting firms like to make their sales by going out to the client, but there's a lot of big four accounting firms that don't go out to their client and don't get the sales. But if the client doesn't see you, then they're not really going to want to give you work. You're just going to win work by RFPs, which a lot of accounting firms do. So I guess that's not too bad. But I think there's going to be a lot of partners that still want their staff to go out to client sites. But who knows, the way the big four accounting firms is going, they're changing so much and it's changing so fast. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and see if working remotely is just something that the big four accounting firms do in the future. I don't think that's the way it is, because I think that would be too easy for associates and senior associates and make their lives too easy. And the big four accounting firms aren't about that life. So to put it nicely, they're not about making people's lives easier. They're about making it harder and more difficult. So I'm not sure if this thing will last for forever. I'm sure it'll be a hybrid model. So we'll have to see how that ends up. But that's the update for today. To get future updates, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. And if you can, support us financially through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes to this podcast. Thanks for listening.